faithfully sharing valuable insights by interpreting great books from around the world. Hello, this is Sally's Book Talk. Today we're diving into this novel, The Moon and Sixpence. Sixpence is a British coin unit. 1 pound equals 100 pence, so sixpence today is about 5 mao in Chinese yuan. In other words, the novel's title is The Moon and 5 mao. The Moon and 5 mao. The story begins with a successful man in his 40s living an enviable middle-class life who suddenly ups and leaves home one day. He gave up money, house, car, wife, and kids, everything. What was he off to do? All right, we'll answer that question later. The author, Maugham, was a British writer. He studied medicine in London for 6 years, but ditched it all for literature at age 23. So, during his lifetime, Maugham was hailed as the world's highest-earning literary master, with works translated globally and enduring popularity. Maugham lived in a pivotal era in British literary history, bridging past traditions and future innovations. The quaint, old-fashioned Victorian literature was fading away. Modernist literature, focusing on realism and psychological depth, was rising, and Maugham emerged as a master storyteller in that tide. His characters feel relatable to everyday people with vivid, suspenseful plots like a mystery novel, yet lofty themes. He's rare, appealing to both highbrow and popular tastes. The Moon and Sixpence was written in 1919, when Maugham was 45 and at his creative peak. He based this novel on the life of French painter Paul Gauguin, who was a key figure in post-impressionism. Gauguin, along with Van Gogh and Cézanne, is called one of the three giants of post-impressionism, profoundly influencing European painting. Let's look at Gauguin's life. Born in Paris, France, he served in the Navy early on, then switched to stockbroking, earning well and having a happy family. However, by chance, he encountered Impressionist painting. To pursue art, he quit his job and cut all ties with his new life. On the distant South Pacific island of Tahiti, he found inner peace and married a local indigenous girl. His life on the island was impoverished, yet he created his most brilliant artworks. In his later years, he held an exhibition featuring Tahitian subjects. But it drew little attention, and he ultimately died in a foreign land. The early life of Charles Strickland, protagonist of The Moon and Sixpence, mirrors Strickland's exactly. Also a stockbroker, he too had a blissful family and lived a life utterly disconnected from art. Then he likewise abandoned worldly life to pursue art. However, Strickland didn't go directly to the South Pacific. He first lived in Paris for many years. So, in Paris, a successful commercial painter admired him and supported him, yet Strickland shamelessly seized his studio, stole his wife, then coldly abandoned her. Afterward, Strickland left Paris for the South Pacific, settling in an indigenous tribe, marrying, having children, and living primitively, tainting the visions in his mind. In his final moments, he personally destroyed his life's proudest masterpiece. He died in poverty and illness. Meanwhile, thousands of miles away in London, Strickland's paintings became wildly popular. The wife he abandoned years ago now posed as the master's widow, becoming a new darling of literary salons. The Moon and Sixpence tells this story. Astonishingly, the author never explicitly mentions the moon or sixpence throughout the entire book. Yet, after finishing, every reader forms their own interpretation of these two symbolic themes. Reportedly, after Maugham's Of Human Bondage was published, the Times literary supplement reviewed it. The protagonist, like many youths, is so moonstruck he overlooks the sixpence at his feet, thus inspiring this novel's title. Naturally, many readers take the opposite view, feeling trapped by earthly needs, unable to pursue their personal moon. The Moon and Sixpence represent two innate human choices: looking up to seek the moon or looking down for sixpence. This up-down divide embodies the chasm between artistic pursuit and social survival. Here, I won't impose a single interpretation, but will explore the moon, sixpence echoes, hidden in Maugham's character portrayals. Who represents the moon symbol in Maugham's heart, and who represents the sixpence? How do these characters echo each other to complete the image of genius in Maugham's mind? First, let's look at the protagonist Strickland. In The Moon and Sixpence, all his actions can be summed up in one phrase: lifelong independence. Before 40, he followed his father's instructions, worked as a stockbroker, was diligent at work, and had a happy family. But at the age of 40, he suddenly left a letter and disappeared. This event had no warning. It could even be called baffling. And so, why did Strickland, at the age of 40, undergo such a change? The novel is written from the first person perspective of a young writer. Though his name never appears, we might as well call him the young writer. Strickland's wife found the young writer and shared her suspicion. She thought her husband was having an affair. Fearing a scandal, she asked the young writer to act as a detective and go to Paris to find her husband. Why choose the young writer to go? This is because the writer had briefly met Strickland once, but had no ties to their social circle. The wife is shrewd. By picking the young writer, she avoided risking family disgrace spreading. This is a classic detective novel setup. After clearly establishing characters and setting, Maugham skillfully poses the puzzle. Why did this happily married London gentleman suddenly vanish? To build suspense, Maugham even deliberately created a character who provides clues. A mutual friend of the young writer and Strickland, who even claimed Strickland had a lover, a young shop assistant in London. Could Strickland have truly embezzled a fortune and run off with the girl? The young writer, having accepted the task, went to Paris. Using the address from Strickland's letter, he found the hotel where Strickland was staying. Strickland himself didn't show up immediately. Through the young writer's eyes, Maugham overturns earlier assumptions. The hotel wasn't a place of revelry. Instead, it was a grimy, dilapidated, dirt-cheap flop house. The young writer specifically asked the waiter, who confirmed Strickland had lived alone, debunking the elopement rumor. Later, the writer finally met Strickland himself, disheveled, destitute, struggling even to eat. Maugham masterfully unravels the mystery like a suspense novel. There was never any mysterious woman. The man had simply found a place to seriously pursue oil painting. Strickland confessed he'd loved painting since childhood, but his father pushed him into business. He had a happy family, yet his heart remained restless, his deepest yearning unfulfilled. He believed in his artistic talent. For a year before leaving, he studied painting nightly at art school. This revelation was astonishing. Remarkably, his wife never knew. When he came home late, she assumed he was playing bridge. This Strickland starkly contrasted the man the writer met at the novel's opening. At that initial banquet, he'd been coldly dismissive of arts. Even his culture-loving wife saw him as a Philistine. Who could predict this crude, predictable man would abandon everything for Paris, leaving only a 10-line, emotionless letter? When questioned, Strickland sipped absinthe and said, "I gave them 20 stable years. I've done my duty." Here, the moon concept in Maugham's novel begins to crystallize. It means abandoning all worldly ties to pursue one's inner calling, seeking spiritual perfection. Strickland's eventual artistic achievements matched Gauguin's, masterful enough to found new schools. While he pursued the moon, his wife opened a typing agency, hiring 4 female typists, and business flourished. 5 years later, before his second trip to Paris, the young writer visited her, asking if she wanted news of her husband. She said if that heartless husband was destitute, she could send money to keep him from starving. This morally superior charity masked revenge, proving she thrived without him while mocking his foolish choice. She represents Sixpence, not unaware of the moon's beauty. Before her husband left, Mrs. Strickland mingled closely with London's literary circles. She often hosted salons, inviting famous or soon-to-be famous writers. That's how the young writer met Mrs. Strickland. At salons, she appeared refined, speaking little but keeping conversations flowing, making everyone comfortable as she courted the art scene. Partly because she genuinely loved reading novels and found writers fascinating, partly hoping ambition with polite veneer, hoping proximity would elevate her status beyond stockbroker's wife, that utterly unartistic title. But this depended entirely on her husband's income, maintaining her middle class life and salon access. So, when she first suspected an affair, she promised instant forgiveness if he returned. But learning he left for art, she declared she'd never forgive him. Cursing like a street harpy, "I'll feel nothing for him. We're strangers now. I hope he dies horribly, in poverty starving alone. May he rot covered in sores, reeking of decay." Someone might ask, oh, so an affair is okay, but pursuing ideals isn't? To answer this, we need to bring in Maugham's contrasting themes of the moon and sixpence. Overall, before Strickland fled the family, both spouses were essentially sixpence. Strickland was the breadwinner. His wife used that material foundation to maintain the household. If Strickland had just had an affair, it would have been a typical midlife crisis. In such cases, Mrs. Strickland could still salvage the family and keep it running. Mrs. Strickland could still live the sixpence life while occasionally glancing at the moonlight in the art circle. But if Strickland left to pursue his inner desires, this textbook middle-class family would collapse without its economic pillar. So Mrs. Strickland didn't forgive her husband, partly because she knew she couldn't change his decision anymore, and partly because she hated his cruelty in destroying her happy, comfortable life, plunging her into the mire of sixpence mundanity. So does Strickland not worry about sixpence at all? Of course not. He still needs to eat and sleep. So how did he solve this? Turns out Strickland had a patron in Paris, also a painter and his admirer, named Dirk Stroeve, a character straddling the moon and sixpence. Strove's paintings were unremarkable, academic, realistic, decorative. He knew he wasn't a great painter. His goal was to make money to live. If the customer was an Italian tycoon, he painted Venetian scenes. For a lady yearning for pastoral beauty, he painted countryside scenes to please her, thus earning a lot. At first glance, Stroeve navigated the mundane world adeptly, seeming the opposite of the moon. But paradoxically, he had superb artistic taste. He instantly recognized Strickland's talent, believing his works would endure for ages. So when Strickland was poor and sick, he supported him unconditionally, believing in and worshiping him. Strove's devotion was like Theo, Van Gogh's brother, even surpassing it. Why do we say that? Beyond financial help, Stroeve even sacrificed his own wife. Stroeve loved his wife Blanche so deeply he'd die for her. Yet when Strickland desired Blanche, Stroeve swallowed his pride, not daring to defy the genius he worshipped. Blanche herself had a past. She'd been a prostitute before Paris, but cherished Stroeve after marrying him. Physically, Stroeve had zero masculine appeal. Short, fat, stubby-legged, thick-necked, building before 30, but Blanche loved him, at least rationally. Strickland, invading their home, stood tall and red-bearded, unshackled, radiating primal energy and animal wildness. He painted not for livelihood or skill, but desperately to manifest inner visions. For Strickland, painting equaled release of primal urges. He dressed filthily, wearing unwashed clothes for years, lived in ruins, couldn't string coherent sentences when interacting, often starved, ate without refinement. Beyond painting, only animal instincts remained. Even painting itself was instinct. Blanche initially feared him, avoiding him. He's uncultured, too crude, claiming she'd rather serve beggars than nurse the gravely ill Strickland. This fear stemmed from seeing Strickland as a lustful monster ready to devour her. She feared precisely because she resonated with that wildness and desire. Sure enough, nursing the ill painter, Blanche touched that wild force and became desire incarnate. She fell madly for him, offering body and soul, ruthlessly expelling husband Strove, begging Strickland's acceptance. But Strickland saw Blanche merely as a tool for releasing urges. He believed love was exhausting, demanding too much time and energy. Beyond satisfying his primal urges, Strickland refused to spare Blanche even a crumb of attention. Receiving no love from the painter, Blanche attempted suicide by drinking acid, not dying instantly, but lingering in agony at the hospital. Strove visited Blanche daily, but she refused him, waiting only for Strickland's change of heart. The acid corroded her vocal cords, scorching her beautiful chin and neck into ruin. Her voice was destroyed, her will shattered. But until her death, Strickland never visited, showing not a flicker of remorse. Like snapping a brush casually, Blanche's only legacy was a nude portrait Strickland painted of her. To Strove, this painting was utter humiliation, yet he worshipped it willingly. Unwilling to destroy this masterful work, he even invited his wife's seducer to live with him in Holland, pledging eternal support. Strove meant every word. Thus, in his own way, he transcended worldly chaos to reach the moon. By now, you've likely noticed, Maugham's moral compass in this novel defies conventional norms. Strickland is a complete scoundrel by worldly standards, yet embodies the moon in the story. After her husband left, Mrs. Strickland earned money through hard work, supporting her family and caring for children. Normally praiseworthy, yet in the novel she's mired in sixpence's mud. Blanche dared to die for love, discarding life itself. In a way, she too is the moon. Her life endures eternally through Strickland's portrait. In Strove, he enslaved himself to his idol, begging Strickland to keep painting, content merely to witness it. He too dwells under the moon. Maugham crafted these characters because here, transcending the mundane outweighs everything. So you might ask, why did Maugham create such a value system so starkly different from the mundane world? This is tied to his own experiences and aspirations. Maugham had a rather bumpy journey from then on. His early novel writing wasn't very successful. After publication, sales were dismal. To make a living, he had to switch to writing plays. And to make money from scripts, he had to bend over backward to cater to the viewing demands of the upper class at the time in terms of plot and characters. So, what were the preferences of the upper class like? I'll use Maugham's works as examples to explain. In 1908, the hottest play in all of London was Maugham's Lady Frederick. This play tells the story of a bankrupt noble widow who, after some hardships, reunites with her old love for a happy ending. With content like that, it ran continuously in London for a whole year, showing how well loved it was. Another hit play by Maugham, Mrs. Dot, had an even more cliched plot than Lady Frederick. The protagonist is similarly a wealthy, beautiful, and elegant lady who lost her husband. After a bunch of farcical twists and turns, she finds her perfect man, and they ride off into the sunset together. Compared to Shakespeare's time, the taste of London's upper class not only showed no progress, but was actually regressing. Theaters were packed with all kinds of naive Mary Sue stories. As long as the plot was a bit more dramatic, the dialogue and pompous talk were a bit fancier, it could win over the upper class crowd. Plus, folks only wanted tales of kings, generals, scholars, and beauties. Stories of common people's hardships? Nah, no one cared about real society and life. Young Maugham became a huge sensation with these blockbusters, but inside, he was suffering. Having once been a medical intern, he knew the lives of ordinary folks all too well. Poverty, destitution, separations, and deaths. These true pictures of lower-class life were deliberately ignored by the hypocritical, flashy upper society. They turned a blind eye, only accepting romantic fluff within their own social circle. This kind of writing caused Maugham great agony, yet he couldn't fully give up the job or the fat income and social status that came with it. Right around then, Maugham took a trip to islands in the South Pacific, like Tahiti and Panama. Oh, Perhaps it was on this journey that Maugham felt the creative fire of Gauguin from decades ago, struck by Gauguin's boldness in ditching everything for his art. After returning to England, he immediately began writing. The Moon and Sixpence fictionalizes such a young writer, using fiction to confront reality. Through Strickland's genius, he expressed his own unfulfilled artistic yearnings. Thus, he wrote novels like The Moon and Sixpence and The Razor's Edge, where artistic pursuit reigns supreme. All right, now back to Strickland's story. In reality, Gauguin died from complications of venereal disease. According to Gauguin's autobiography, Noah Noah, he often felt lonely and depressed in Tahiti, missing Parisian city life. He wasn't entirely indifferent to fame. He still held exhibitions and auctions to maintain connections and his reputation. The reason he could stay for years in the remote South Pacific wasn't manual labor. It was inheriting his uncle's estate and selling paintings to avoid poverty. But Strickland, in Maugham's version, inherited nothing. He refused exhibition invitations, never sold paintings, and wouldn't even show them to outsiders. Even works he poured his life into, he'd destroy them without hesitation, silently suffering terminal illness. Compared to the real Gauguin, Maugham's fictional Strickland is pure, more extreme. The novel's ending shrouds Strickland's death in mysticism. The French doctor retrieving his body described his final masterpiece as evoking evil black magic with raw, soul-shaking power. Strickland died blind and mutilated on a strong mat, as if his soul had been drained. Or rather, he painted his soul onto the canvas, leaving only an empty shell. Compared to Gauguin, Strickland is more idealistic, more uncompromising. Maugham stripped all traces of Sixpence from Gauguin's life, crafting an utterly pure, transcendent moon, unattainable by mortals. In the end, Maugham didn't forget Strickland's family. He concluded London's Sixpence narrative. After Strickland's death, his talent gained fleeting recognition. His art became wildly popular, with prices soaring. The wife he abandoned years ago became art world royalty as the master's widow. She never understood Strickland's relentless, creative drive till death, nor forgave his abrupt departure. But that didn't stop her profiting from his work. Maugham has the young writer meet Strickland's family in the final chapter, sharing his last years. The fiercest clash between Moon and Sixpence erupts in the novel's final 3 paragraphs. When describing Strickland's gruesome death, his son Robert, now a priest, lit a cigarette and said, "God's mill grinds slow but sure." What does this mean? Simply put, it's like the Chinese saying, "Heaven's net may be wide, but nothing escapes." Robert meant his father's wicked deeds earned that brutal death. Hearing this from Strickland's own son is deeply ironic. Moon and Sixpence factions fundamentally cannot understand or reconcile. Maugham divides humanity into these extremes, using the young writer to expose their irreconcilable rift, prompting readers to question, does absolute artistic beauty exist? Was pursuing the moon nobler than Sixpence? Readers must answer this themselves. Through the young writer, Maugham reveals his own leanings. God's mill isn't actually in the Bible. Yet hearing this, Mrs. Strickland and her daughter bowed devoutly. What does this show? It shows both mistakenly thought Robert was quoting scripture. In other words, they barely knew the Bible and feigned piety. This made the young writer recall, the devil can cite scripture for his purpose. Oh, Maugham's stance is crystal clear now. For those who don't truly understand beauty and art, they're just flashy decorations, tools for profit, mere accessories to mundane life. But for someone like Strickland, pursuing beauty is life's only true purpose. Well, that wraps up our interpretation of The Moon and Sixpence. Find reading notes below the audio. See you tomorrow.